Welcome, everyone. Come on in, welcome, welcome. We'll get started here in just a moment as we wait for folks to trickle in. Settle in. I hope you're finding ways to stay cool in the middle of this enormous heat wave we all are going through right now. Welcome, it's great to see some familiar faces. Hello. Welcome. I invite you to keep your video camera on so we can see your wonderful faces as we do this webinar together. And welcome. My name is Emma Tacky, and I am the Director of Community Engagement for Catholic Mobilizing Network. Our webinar today is entitled Young Catholics Needed, the Movement to End the Death Penalty. I'm so glad you're here. I would love for you all to introduce yourself in the chat. Please tell us your name, where you're coming from, and we'd also like to know, since this webinar is about inviting young Catholics to become involved in the movement to end the death penalty, we want to know who we have in the room with us today. So if you are a young adult between the ages of 18 to 30, could you do me a favor and add the initials YA to your Zoom name? And you can see we have examples here from Danny Gallagher and Zuri Davis as well. You'll see they put the initials YA after their names. Go ahead and please do that. And we'll get started. Maura, I will hand things over to you to go over a few of our housekeeping reminders before we dive in.
Thank you, Emma. Welcome, everyone. So glad you're able to join us today. Just wanted to run you through a quick things you should know participating in this webinar. If you have any technical issues at all today, please send a chat to my colleague Fatima. She has the word tech in front of her name, so you'll be able to easily find her. Send her a message if you're having any issues, and hopefully she can help you to troubleshoot those. I do want you to know this webinar will be recorded, and it's going to be sent to all of those who registered but maybe couldn't attend live today. It is also being live streamed onto our Facebook page, and just an FYI, that only live streams the presentation and the speaker themselves. So the gallery itself is not being live streamed, but the speakers of this event are. And if you're comfortable, we would love to have you keep your video on with us. You know, it helps us give us that sense like maybe we're in a real room together rather than spread across the country, and give some solidarity in this work in which solidarity is so important. So if you're comfortable with it, keep your video on. We would love to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thank you, Maura. So we'll just do a quick review of what we're covering today. First, I'll share just a bit about the background of Catholic Mobilizing Network, who we are, if you're not familiar. And then I want to share a bit about our inaugural poetry contest for young Catholics that we held this spring. And then we'll hear from one of the winners of that contest. After that, we will dive into learning from our featured guest, Christina Swarns, who is the current executive director of the Innocence Project. After we hear from Christina, you'll have a chance to hear from another poetry contest winner, Danny Gallagher. Then I'll share some concrete ways that we're inviting young Catholics into the movement to end the death penalty. And before we wrap up with our closing prayer, we have a moment for you to think about ways that you can get involved in the movement to end the death penalty. We'll do some quick discernment, which I recognize the phrase quick discernment is a bit of an oxymoron, but we just want to get your juices flowing about how to get involved in this movement to end the death penalty as young Catholics. Okay, so first, who is Catholic Mobilizing Network? So we are the national Catholic organization that works with Catholics and people of goodwill to educate, advocate, and pray for an end to the death penalty and to promote restorative justice. We've been at this work for over a decade, founded in 2009. And at the heart of our mission is the belief that each person has God-given dignity, no matter the harm one has caused or suffered. So we work to eliminate capital punishment. which we see as the most punitive, violent, and dehumanizing practice in our legal system. And at the same time, through restorative justice, we work to uplift responses to harm that are consistent with the gospel and align with Catholic social teaching principles. Now, CMN strives to do this work with all Catholics and people of goodwill in the US in this shared mission to build a criminal legal system that upholds and protects human dignity. And this includes young Catholics. Young people we know are an integral and important part of our church and are also needed in the mission to abolish capital punishment. We know this is a justice issue many young people care about. So this year, with this in mind, CMN wanted to find a unique way to intentionally invite young Catholics into our work to educate, advocate, and end the death penalty. So enter the Justice and Mercy Poetry Contest for young Catholics. This contest, which we ran from March 1st through May 31st, invited any Catholic in the US between the ages 18 to 30 to submit an original poem about the injustice of the death penalty. Contestants were encouraged to consider a number of factors and themes when it comes to capital punishment, including the racial bias and racist roots embedded in the US death penalty system, the inherent risk of executing an innocent person, and how the death penalty really denies our gospel call to uphold and honor human dignity as people of faith. So the three winners and the three runners-up of the contest were chosen this June by a diverse group of committee members, which included a death row exoneree from Ohio, a young attorney in New Orleans working on post-conviction capital cases, and staff from the US Conference of Catholic Bishops, and including others as well, who all brought an array of interest, experience, and skills when it comes to engaging young Catholics, to ending the death penalty, and to using poetry as a way to nurture the intersection of justice and faith. And so today we are so honored, and I personally am just so thrilled to see the fruits of this poetry contest. But we have two of our poetry contest winners here with us today who are going to read their poems live for you. So later in the webinar, we'll hear from Danny Gallagher, who won second place for her poem, If Prison is a Grave. Danny is a 23-year-old graduate student at Boston College, where she is working towards a master's degree in theology and ministry as well as a master's in clinical social work. She hopes to become a pastoral counselor and is interested in pursuing a career in prison ministry or substance abuse counseling. Danny will read her poem later in the webinar, but here to read her poem now, we have Zuri Davis, who received third place in the Justice and Mercy Poetry Contest for her poem entitled The Tools. 26-year-old Zuri is a criminal justice reform communication strategist. Prior to this, she covered police abuse, wrongful convictions, the death penalty, and other failings in the criminal justice system as a journalist for 5 years. And she is in Florida. So I invite you all now to take a moment and close your eyes, take a breath, center yourself, and prepare to hear from Zuri, who is about to share with us her excellent poem, The Tools. So I'll model what I just asked of you all, and I'll close my eyes, I'll take a breath. Okay, Zuri, we are ready for you when you are.
The whip, the rope, the bullet, the needle. These are the tools used to kill my people. My great-grandpapa got the whip. It started off like any other day. He did the tasks until his back was sore while plotting his escape. When night came, he saw his chance and tried to make his way to freedom. But Master caught up and dragged him to a shed where blood replaced sebum. My grandpapa got the rope. It started off like any other day. He was tending the citrus grove in the hot Florida May. His bountiful crop put a neighbor to shame, so a crowd came that evening. They beat him, drowned him, burned him, and left his body swinging. My papa got the bullet. It started off like any other day. He was driving to the office when his Jaguar's engine gave way. He pulled over and called for help when an officer saw him standing there, reasoned the car couldn't be his, and shot my papa when he got scared. And I got the needle. It started off like any other day. I drove a friend to the gas station. He went inside to pay. He came back with blood on his hands and $80 in his pocket. I swear I didn't know he would kill a man, but my name is still on the docket. The whip, the rope, the bullet, the needle. These are the tools used to kill innocent people.
Wow. Zuri, thank you so much for those words, for being willing to submit a poem to this first time poetry contest, to be brave and bold in your word choice and in your subject matter. So thank you so much. And I think Zuri's poem is such a powerful reminder that really, as long as the death penalty exists, the risk of executing an innocent person is all too real. And now I'd like to take a moment and introduce our special guest, who is someone who works every day to help people on death row, innocence claims. Welcome, Christina Swarns. Christina Swarns has dedicated her entire professional career to criminal justice reform. She is currently the executive director of the Innocence Project, effective September 2020. Previously, she served as the president and attorney in charge of the Office of the Appellate Defender Incorporated, one of New York City's oldest institutional providers of indigenous appellate defense representation. Swarns has also spent more than a decade at the NAACP, Legal Defense and Educational Fund Incorporated, LDF, where she served as LDF's litigation director and criminal justice project director. Prior to joining LDF, Ms. Swarns served as a supervising assistant federal defender and assistant federal defender at the Capital Habeas Unit of Philadelphia's Federal Community Defender Office. While there, Ms. Swarns represented numerous individuals with death sentences whose convictions and/or death sentences were reversed, including Nicholas Yaris, the first man sentenced to death in Pennsylvania, and later to be exonerated by DNA evidence. A passionate legal advocate, Ms. Swarns speaks and writes regularly on issues concerning race, law, and criminal justice. She is also a member of Catholic Mobilizing Network's board of directors. Christina Swarns earned a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and a BA from Howard University. So, all that said, Christina, welcome. We're just thrilled to have you here to speak to our audience today and talk about your career, your experience in this work, and how young folks interested in the movement and the death penalty might get involved today. So we'll begin with our first question. How did you first become involved in this work to end the death penalty? What drew you to this kind of work in the first place?
Thank you, Emma, and thanks to Catholic Mobilizing for inviting me to this conversation today. And thank you so much, Zuri, for your poem. It was really, really incredibly powerful and really does speak to the history of the death penalty and the history of criminal justice in this country. And so thank you for sharing that. It's a perfect backdrop to this conversation. So in answer to your question, I am a person who did not really know what they wanted to do for a long time. I wanted to, by the time I figured out I wanted to be a lawyer, I really didn't know what kind of lawyer I wanted to be, except that I wanted to do good things. I went to Catholic high school. In the Catholic high school I went to in Staten Island, New York, with Notre Dame Academy, and we did a lot around social justice. There was a lot of really sustained attention around issues of social justice in this country and in the world. And I'm 100% confident, although I can't tell you the example right now, that the death penalty was a thing that we discussed. And, you know, I knew going into college and law school, you know, that I was opposed to the death penalty sort of for moral, for religious reasons, but I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about it beyond that, because when I grew up in New York, and the death penalty wasn't a thing that was really present for me. So it wasn't until after I went to law school and I was sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with myself and my career that I wound up interning with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And the week I started there, the Capital Punishment Project were fighting for the life of a gentleman in Arkansas. I remember vividly, like this, like I said, there was like the week I showed up, there was a guy named Barry Lee Fairchild who was under active threat, like an active death warrant pending, an execution date, and the lawyers at the Legal Defense Fund were, frantically working to find ways to stop the execution. And so I learned about the case, and this was a case of a man with an intellectual disability. This was a case about a man who had been, where there was real evidence that he had been, physically abused by the police, and that's how he wound up giving a confession. So there was real question about both his guilt and the appropriateness of the death penalty, even assuming he was guilty because of his intellectual disability. And really, it was this one case that, for the first time, had this, was the light bulb moment where I realized, this is what the death penalty is, right? This is the current operation of the death penalty in our country, is that, we are literally trying to put to death, right, this poor man who maybe didn't even commit this crime, who, even if he did, has an intellectual disability. And so it was sort of this case and this moment, and watching these extraordinary lawyers, fight for his life, that really was the moment where it all sort of, this background I had, right, the teaching I had probably from high school and in my own household, merged with the lessons that I had learned and the work that I had done in law school, where it was like, oh, I can actually make these two things walk together. And it was really an exciting moment to realize, right, that I could do both. The good news is my colleagues got a stay of execution. My colleagues at LDF got a stay of execution that time. They didn't win in the end of the day, but that time they did get a stay of execution, and that was it, right? After that, I was really excited and committed to doing death penalty work.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. I wonder, could you share a bit about your experience of working on the Nicholas Yaris case and arguing that case before the Supreme Court, and just what that meant to you for your career and everything?
Sure. So the Nicholas Yaris case, so that is actually the very first death penalty case I ever worked on. That's the interesting part of that story. So after I graduated from law school, I became a public defender, in Manhattan, and I did trial cases for just regular, pre-arrest trial cases. But I knew I wanted to do death penalty cases, so I ultimately got this opportunity to go to Philadelphia and represent people on death row in Pennsylvania. And the very first case, the first set of boxes that were planted in my office for me to work on was the case of Nicholas Yaris. So Nick is a gentleman who was condemned to death. Is anyone else hearing the audio noise?
No, sorry about that, Christina. There's a muting discrepancy there, but we're all set now.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, so he was convicted of capital murder. It was a rape murder just outside of Philadelphia. And by the time I got the case, it was an old case, so it was like 1982, and I was stepping into this case many years later. And by the time I got into the case, we were headed into federal court, like rounds of appeals had gone by, and we were headed into federal court. The thing that was interesting about Nick's case, aside from the real questions of his guilt or innocence, was that, when I came on to his case, it was about 1999 or so. And, the Innocence Project opened its doors in 1992. And as you know, or as many of you know, right, it was the Innocence Project that sort of introduces this idea of using DNA technology to disprove or to prove that someone who has been convicted of a crime was actually innocent. So we're really only 5 to 7 years from the introduction of DNA evidence and the use of DNA evidence in the criminal legal system when I wound up representing Nick. Now, Nick was extraordinarily bright and really, I can't explain like how emphatic he was that he was innocent, right? He was, from the first phone call, from the first visit, from the first letter, he was just emphatic about the fact that he was innocent. And to his great credit, not only was he emphatic about it, he was also diligent about researching and staying on top of the law, and in this case, on top of the science. So when I got to his case, he was already aware of the phenomenon of DNA testing. He knew what labs were doing it. He knew everything that, you know, he could possibly know about DNA technology. So one of the first things he said was, I need, you know, the DNA has to be tested in this case. And again, you're now like, look, it's 5 years away from the opening, or 6 years of the Innocence Project. So my office, the federal defender, we had never done a DNA case, you know. So, you know, we were like, okay, you know, I have no idea how to do this, but it was exciting, right? The idea of doing it was also a gift, where it was exciting to me to learn this novel technology. And so that's what we did. You know, it was, I will say, and I say this all the time, the first thing I did, the only thing I knew to do, we called the Innocence Project. I was like, who knows how to do this? I was like, oh, I know who knows how to do this, right? The people in New York at the Innocence Project. And that is how we litigated the case, or, you know, me and my colleagues. You know, we were on the phone with Barry and Peter and their colleagues. Then they were based still at Cardozo Law School. And we were saying, okay, so what do I need? You know, they talked us through sort of the evidence, that the kinds of evidence that could be tested, you know, where to look for it, you know, not to take no for an answer, you know, to physically bring myself down to the DA's office, to the police department, right? To say, don't accept that they've looked for it. Say, I will go in the closet and look for it myself. To do all of these things. These are things I've learned from the Innocence Project. And we did all those things. And, you know, lo and behold, we did find biological evidence in Nick's case that was not degraded and could be tested. And, you know, again, with the leadership and the, you know, support of the Innocence Project, they told us what expert to use, and we flew it out to California and we had the evidence tested. Now, what happened was, the first time we had it tested, it was inconclusive. And so we actually had a delay where we had to make a decision, and Nick had to make a decision. And the question on the table was, we can do a second round of testing, but it will use up all the rest of the biological evidence. And so you will, you know, lose any other chance you might have, right? The science will certainly develop, but you won't have any more biological evidence available to you. And so it was a huge risk, and it was a huge gamble. And this is just really a credit to Nick's complete, clear-eyed, you know, understanding that he wasn't guilty of this crime, while all of us as the lawyers anguished over whether or not we should exhaust this evidence. He was like, test it now, right? Test it now. And we did. And of course, we know what happened. We got a complete exoneration. And, you know, and so Nick became in 1990, actually, so I've lied to you. So yeah, it was about So I started his case in about 97, and about 2002, 2003, he became the first death sentence prisoner in Pennsylvania to be exonerated by DNA evidence. And it was amazing. You know, not only did I get to stand in federal court and announce, right, for the first time in Pennsylvania history, right, we had a DNA exoneration. We then, you know, had the pleasure, I had then moved on to the Legal Defense Fund by the time he was released from prison. But, you know, I will never forget, you know, my cell phone ringing, and it was Nick, you know, in a car being driven home by my colleagues from death row in Pennsylvania to his parents' home in Philadelphia, and just calling, it's just crazy, right? My client to be calling on my cell phone, you know, talking about, oh my God, I'm driving home now. So it was an extraordinary experience.
Wow, I bet that is a moment you just don't forget.
No.
Phone call. Wow, I have goosebumps. Thank you so much for sharing about that. And just, I think you describing Nick's conviction and just him being so adamant that I am innocent, and like here's what we need to do to show that, just shows that you know, centering the voices of folks who are on death row is so crucial in this movement, in this work that we're doing.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Christina, my next question for you is, you've been doing this work, you know, for a number of years now. What gives you hope in this work, which can be really demoralizing and discouraging and difficult? And I'm just wondering, can you share a bit about the progress that you've seen in this
So I'm going to take that as two questions. What gives me hope and what progress I've seen, because I think of them differently for whatever reason. So the progress is enormous. You know, I am old enough to have worked in and done this work again. Like I said, I graduated from law school a year after the Innocence Project opened its doors. So when I was in Manhattan as a trial public defender, and when I first graduated, you know, there wasn't this broad-based understanding of the fallibility of the criminal legal system, right? That is a product of the work that the Innocence Project did. So when I started, you know, people didn't believe it, right? People believed if you were arrested, you were guilty, right? If you were in the system, you did something wrong. And after that, shrug, we're not concerned with it, right? It was the work of the Innocence Project that really called into question things that people didn't question when I started out, right? Like when I started out, you know, everyone believed like an eyewitness identification is rock solid, right? If you, right, you think, and we all think it, right? Like I think it, right? I think to myself, if I am robbed, if something happens, I'm going to do all the things, I'm going to scrutinize the person's face. We all think to ourselves, we are magical in our ability to identify, right? Somebody who does something to us. But, you know, through the work of the Innocence Project, right? Because what we had happen was we had hundreds of exonerations, DNA exonerations, and those hundreds of exonerations were in cases where there were eyewitness identifications made by people who were sincere and confident and certain, right, of the identification that they made, but the science proved them wrong, right? And so, you know, again, so I started at a time when there was no question about identification testimony. The Innocence Project, you know, the world is totally different. We now know that people get it wrong all the time, right? I can tell you that if all of us are confronted with a gun-wielding robber, our eyes are not going to go to their face as much as we might want it to, right? Because actually, our eyes are going to go to that gun because we are worried about being shot. So your focus is not going to be right on the face; it's going to be on the weapon. You know, I can now tell you because of the work of the Innocence Project that I am going to be far less able to identify someone of a different race than I am going to be of my own race. And that applies to every single one of us, right? There is an own race bias in terms of our ability to identify other people, right? But again, that is something that was not just, you know, that didn't even exist as a thought when I first started out. And so to have been doing this work and see how that knowledge changed the way people proceed in the criminal legal system is sort of a change, right? I've seen how judges treat things differently, prosecutors treat these kinds of cases differently, jurors, all of us, right? And it's not just eyewitness identification, right? It's confessions, right? We know, again, through the work of the Innocence Project, same 292 cases, right? DNA exonerations. A lot of those folks confessed to crimes they did not commit. And all of us, myself included today, will tell you there is no way on earth I'm ever going to confess to a crime I didn't commit. I also know I'm wrong, right? I can tell you that people do, right? Many of us will, right? Police are professionals. They know how to, get statements from people. And especially from those who are vulnerable, right? So the people who are more likely to make false confessions among us are the children, the younger ones, people who with intellectual disabilities, people who are perhaps coming down from being drunk or high, right? That's the sweet spot of false confessions. But that was completely unknown right at the time. So the world has changed, and then just the knowledge, right, that people are wrongfully convicted in the system, right? That there was a huge problem of wrongful conviction. So, I mean, I have seen such extraordinary change in the understanding of the criminal legal system sort of during my time in it, and watched, as the system sort of adjusted to this reality, right? And we saw it in the death penalty, right? As the number of exonerations in this country climbed, we saw prosecutors starting to become a lot more wary of the decision to seek death, right? And we saw jurors, right? Remarkable change in juror decision-making, right? Juror willingness to impose death sentences, right? We look at the polls. Again, you see in this country that the number of Americans who support the death penalty as opposed to supporting life without parole has, right? And I think we've hit some like 30-year lows, right? And folks, when you push the question, are, will point to the concern about, executing an innocent person. So really the world has changed, under my feet as I have done the work. So all that gives me hope, but really the thing that gives me hope more than anything else, are the people that I have met, the people that I have worked with, and the people that I have represented mostly, and their families. I have represented lots of people, many of whom, were guilty before the Innocence Project, were guilty of the crimes for which they were convicted. All of the people I represented, came from the hardest of places, right? There is without close second, right? The stories of the experiences that my clients endured of abuse, of trauma, of addiction, of all the worst things that humans can do to each other. Every single one of the people I represent experienced that. And in the face of such trauma, of such sadness, of such pain, of such, anguish, I have never not found grace, right? I have always, without exception, when I'm in a prison cell, when I'm in somebody's family's home, you will find laughter, you will find humor, I have always found just extraordinary kindness. And it's that gives me hope. And that blows me away every time, that people who have faced and do face and are facing the hardest, most difficult times in their lives somehow manage to carry, right, all of this other stuff with them as well. And that to me is extraordinary. I mean, just extraordinary, right? I think to myself of the favor, right, that I have, and the fortune that I have had. And I don't know how I would carry the things that these folks have carried, but I see it, and I have seen it every day. And that really gives me hope about humanity and the ability of people, the resilience of human beings. And one more thing, I could ramble about this all day. And then the other thing I would just say is that the other thing that gives me a lot of hope is that I've also, of course, had the privilege and the honor and the challenge of sitting with those whose families were the victims, right, of crimes, my clients, right, committed. And the grace there as well is exceptional, right? I have sat with people who have found a way to forgive under circumstances that are almost unimaginable, right? Like it's hard to imagine how they're finding the ability to forgive under the circumstances. I remember when I worked in Philadelphia, meeting with the sister of one of my clients who had killed his sister's family. And she just, she was so, she did not want him to go home, but she did not want him to die. And she was so clear about that this was at the end of the day her brother, right? And she loved him. And I remember coming out of it, it's hard to wrap your head around. I was like, I'm going to need some Advil, and I need to take a nap. It's a lot. It was just, but in the best way, right? Like not in a bad way. It was just extraordinary. And so there's so much reason for hope in there.
Christina, that was also beautifully said. Amen. I have tears in my eyes. I think it's just so, it just speaks to the heart and the respect for human dignity that this kind of work requires, and that you exemplify so well every day in your interactions with your clients and their families and the families of murder victims. Just a note, this spring, the CMN staff had a chance to have some FaceTime with an attorney with Equal Justice Initiative. And she said something very similar of, well, what gives you hope? Like, how do you stay in this really difficult work? And she said, it's my clients. It's the people that I get to see and interact with every day. That shows me how worth it this work really is. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Okay, Christina, our next question is, you've been on the board of Catholic Mobilizing Network for around 4 years now. why is being on the board of CMN important to you? What does it mean to you?
So, this is a great question. So I think at the end of the day, it's funny. It's like you do things, you don't really think about why you do them. And this was a question I was like, why do I do this? Why do I stay on this board? And I think the answer to the question is because I get a lot out of it, really, like personally. So I think that, number one, every time I come to a board meeting, I learn things that I did not already know, and I see things in a way that I hadn't already seen them. And I think it's really important. That's really important for me. So, for example, when I first joined Catholic Mobilizing Network's board, I knew almost nothing, I think, about restorative justice. Almost nothing. Maybe nothing. And as a litigator, right, as a person who dedicated a career to sort of fighting things out in a courtroom, it was hard at first to understand how this could possibly work. But really, like being on the board and listening and working with, my colleagues at CMN who are walking this out every day has taught me so much about how important it is for me to think about the best way of accomplishing, right, the goals that I have set for myself, which is to say, right, I'm not actually doing the work that I do because I love necessarily like litigation, right? I do the work that I do because of what I believe in, right? These fundamental ideals about human beings and the sanctity of life, right? And if there is a better way of accomplishing that, of upholding really, right? Really upholding, human life and value, and really meeting needs, because I know clearly that the criminal legal system doesn't really meet needs, right? So it has really forced me to think hard about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and whether it can be done better. So I would say for me personally, right, I get a lot out of being on the board of CMN. I think it makes me a better advocate for the work, right? I think it makes me better at what I do. I also think sort of practically though, I recognize that for us to achieve as a society, right, these goals, I know we need to reach a lot of people, right? And we need people to hear this and to hear these stories. And we need a lot of people to understand, engage, and sort of do the same thing that I'm doing, right? To sort of grapple with these questions and then go out in the world and keep, right? And sort of spread the, make it, it's like infectious, right? Spread these questions, right? Make other people, make their neighbors ask the same questions. And that's the power of Catholic Mobilizing Network, right? It has the ability and the reach, right? Sort of up and down, right? It has extraordinary connections right at the top of the church and the hierarchy of the church, right? And you can get, and we do get, right, statements of extraordinary principle from, principles, in the church, and that matters. But I think what matters more is that we have the ability to reach into parishes and to have conversations with individuals who then are having conversations in their households and at their dinner tables and with their friends. And, and that is ultimately the way, right, we're going to change and end the death penalty in this country. It's about, me having conversations with my daughter and her friends and explaining, why I represent people who kill, right? Those are the stories that they're going to remember more than what they hear, on the news or whatever, right? It becomes these very personal interactions. And I think that Catholic Mobilizing is like seeding all of these really intimate conversations around the country and the world. I think that's going to propel us forward, and both restorative justice and in the death penalty.
Thank you. Well, as a staff member of CMN, I loved hearing all of that. But I think you're so right in terms of the, it's going to take a lot of people to officially end the death penalty in the US. So any way that we all can be accompanying one another in the shared work is so crucial to the work. Christina, I wonder, could you spend a couple minutes talking about why it's important for young people to become involved in movements like ending the death penalty?
Well, I mean, the short answer is because the young people always push us forward. Always, every generation pushes the prior generation, forward. Right. My generation, has done a lot. Right. We did many things, and we've moved the needle a long way. But you always need fresh thoughts. We need people who don't operate under the limits that I may have based on my experience. I want people, that's what you want. You always want, I always want people with unlimited optimism to be saying, this is what we should be doing, right? Because that's really, right? If you always say like, well, that didn't work, that, if you operate from a framework of what didn't work, which ultimately happens to people who have been doing it for a long time, you sort of get to like, I'm not going to go through that fight again, right? So you kind of need people who aren't jaded and aren't exhausted by the fight to come out and say, there are no limits, and let's start having conversations beyond the limits of where we have gotten, to today. And so that's what I think, right, every young person in this country brings, right? This boundless optimism of seeing a world beyond the one we have, and not seeing the challenges and the obstacles, but only seeing the promise and the way forward. And so I think that, right, so you have to both, right? It ultimately works because both sides come together. But I think that young people are always sort of pushing the needle forward every generation. That's what happens, right? You have a new cadre of people who come in and ask really, hard questions like, why aren't we doing this? And it's like, well, that's a very good question. I have no earthly idea why we're not doing that, right? We probably should try. Or people willing, right, who have the will to try things that are so audacious and so far beyond, what my generation was willing to do, right? That's just like hope and inspiration and like all the things. I mean, we saw it, over the last, 3 years with George Floyd, right? The demands that have been put out are so far beyond what my generation, right, has done. I mean, you have to respect and love the audacity of, right, this vision for a new world, and that's what we need. And so, yeah, I want people out there who are young, who are not biased, who are not jaded, who are not, don't have the experience of why you can't, and are only looking at, we have to, and we will, and we can, and there's no reason not to. So that's what I think. Every generation, you got to push it forward.
Thank you. I love it. And I think too, you touched on this already, but my final question for you is, okay, let's say a young person is committed, they get it, they say, yes, I want to get involved in this work to end the death penalty. Where do they begin? Like, is there any sort of practical advice you might offer a young person who is
CNN,
engaged?
But then first answer, CNN. I mean, I think, listen, there are lots of ways to do it. I would say criminal justice is a inherently local practice at the end of the day, right? These are each decision, each death decision is made by a locally elected prosecutor. So the first answer is always, know who your prosecutor is, know who, what his or her policies are, and then vote, and vote, right? Vote them out if they are not, promoting policies that are consistent with what you think the criminal legal system should be. Number two, speak out, right? I mean, we have seen, there can be no doubt at this point in history, right, that the power of community and the power of collective voices can and does change the trajectory of cases, of campaigns, of political systems, right? And that is what people, folks should be doing, right? If you see, know what's happening in the courthouse, get involved and speak out against those cases that are being, prosecuted. The Innocence Project, I will say, go to the Innocence Project website. We have a take action page where we will keep folks up to date. You can get, on your phone and all the emails, texts, all the things in your jurisdiction where we can tell you about legislation that we are, supporting, or cases that, for example, we had this spring, Melissa Lucio in Texas, who was facing execution for the death of her daughter, which wasn't even a crime, like the accidental death of her daughter. She was sentenced to death and then she was facing an execution. And, we worked incredibly hard to stop that execution. And we did so through the power of people, right? Reaching out and making clear that Melissa, the execution of Melissa Lucio was going to have real political cost. And so it was stopped. And so, go to the Innocence Project's website as well. There are lots of organizations that are, active and can keep you up to date, but I would say CMN, get involved in local politics, check out the Innocence Project's website.
Excellent. I second and underscore everything you said. Yes, and it's so true that this work is so local, like it's county decisions, it's state decisions. So I really encourage folks, if you live in a state that has the death penalty, really Google or try to find your local state coalition to end the death penalty as well. And CMN is happy to assist in connecting you to any of those organizations too. So Christina, thank you so much for sharing your insight, wisdom, and advice. I feel like the whole hour could have been spent just asking you questions, but we're so grateful for you being here with us today, and also just so proud to have you as a board member of CMN too. So with that, I would like now to pivot to our second place winner of our poetry contest, Danny Gallagher, who will share with us her poem, If Prison is a Grave. Danny, whenever you're ready.
If prison is a grave. I was in prison and you visited me. Lord, what if prison is a grave? Because this world is set to put to death the same child you died to save. I sat down across the table from a man 3 times my size, with ink all up his arms and tattooed teardrops by his eyes. I looked around, heart beating fast. I knew I was out of place. He said, "It means so much to have you here," with a soft smile on his face. He told me of his fears and hopes and of the dreams he once would pine, as I winced a bit with uneasiness at how alike his were to mine. I'd assumed we'd be so different due to our circumstance at birth, as it seems today that that's the thing to determine what a life is worth. Where I knew love and playgrounds, he knew fear and gangs, fighting for survival, but now his life in the balance hangs, because the same system that had failed him all throughout his life seeks to come full circle now to end his ceaseless strife. It seems those walls are not impenetrable. They're meant to keep the people in. But to the injustice of the outside world, cement walls become quite thin. A system built on racial bias that looks upon the poor with harsh disdain, where the mentally ill and the impoverished are those most likely to be slain. A world fallen to hypocrisy with logic oh so feeble, where we declare with pride that I'm pro-life, all while rooting for the needle. Because a life lived behind bars is not seen as a life at all. They dehumanize our sisters and brothers and set them up to watch them fall. Vengeance and discrimination define the system we're told to trust, but calling it the justice system doesn't make it just. So I'll return back to my question. What if prison is a grave? Are we qualified to end the life of a sinner you forgave?
Oh, Danny, thank you so much. Poems are meant to be read out loud. Like you hear it differently rather than when you're just reading it on words on the page. So thank you, so beautiful, Danny. And Zuri, thank you as well for your excellent poem. I'll just say that as the poetry contest was running, I was watching all the poems come in and I was reading every poetry submission that we got, and yours both stood out to me right away when we received them as truly exceptional. So I'm just so touched that you have agreed to be a part of this webinar and to have submitted a poem in the first place. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we're going to move on now to some CMN specific resources get involved in the death penalty abolition movement. These are, for people of all ages, but particularly if you are a young person or if there's a young person in your life who you are wanting to invite into this movement, please do so. And you might start with a few of these resources. So first, we have our petition to end the federal death penalty addressed to President Biden, who is a Catholic and the first sitting president to publicly condemn the death penalty. So we have some actions that President Biden can take to end the federal death penalty once and for all. And then we also have our Just Mercy study guide, which, if you all are familiar with the book Just Mercy and the film based on the book Just Mercy, we have created a reflection, a study guide for Catholics to use as they watch the film. So this can be used individually or in a small group setting, but it's a way to kind of parse through the film and really talk about these questions of justice and of racism, particularly with how they match up with what we're called as Catholics to look for. And then we have our Mercy in Action project, which is a monthly email that goes out with designated action alerts surrounding executions. So it's a pre-written letter template that you can fill out with your name, and you can edit the letter as you see fit. But these letters will go to the governor or to the Board of Pardons and Parole in that state where there's an execution, urging them to stop the execution coming up. And so my colleague Fatima is putting those links in the chat. Thank you so much, Fatima. And then I also want to put out there that we have monthly prayer vigils every first Friday of the month. We gather together in community on Zoom in this virtual prayer space, and we pray for those with upcoming scheduled executions for that month and their families and their victims and the families of the victims, as well as anyone else who will be impacted by these state-sanctioned acts of violence. So that's every first Friday of the month, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And Fatima is putting in the chat a way to sign up to get those emails as well. And then I also want to invite you to consider applying for an internship at Catholic Mobilizing Network. We have 3 interns currently. Sarah and Christian are here with us today in the Zoom. And then we have a 3rd intern, Paul, who's with us this summer. But we have regular internships in the summer, in the fall, in the spring semesters. So if you are interested or know someone who might be interested, we are currently thinking about our fall and spring internships for this coming year. And you can send in your resume or application at info@catholicsmobilizing.org. Or if you have any questions, feel free to email me at emmat@catholicsmobilizing.org. And we'll put my contact information in the chat as well. And then, I also wanted to share that in addition to the Innocence Project, in addition to Catholic Mobilizing Network, there are so many organizations working to advocate for people on death row, working to educate the public about the death penalty. And I just wanted to lift up a couple of those organizations today. First, we have the Equal Justice Initiative, which, speaking of the film and book, Just Mercy, this is the nonprofit that Brian Stevenson founded in Montgomery, Alabama. So in addition to working to get people on Alabama's death row exonerated, the Equal Justice Initiative has also expanded its work to public education, specifically in the form of the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. The museum and the memorial honor victims of racial violence and seek to bring to light our country's history of slavery, lynching, mass incarceration, all of which is rooted in racial violence. So I encourage you to visit their website and consider making a trip to Montgomery to see the museum and memorial in person. It truly is such a powerful experience that you will not be the same after visiting. The second organization I want to lift up is Witness to Innocence, which is a nonprofit that was founded by and for death row exonerees. Their mission is to empower exonerated death row survivors to be the most powerful and effective voices in the fight to end the death penalty in the United States. So through public speaking, testifying in state legislatures, and media interviews, exonerated people from death row, exposed the reality that innocent people are sentenced to death. Death row exonerees, the issue of innocence, these have both been really pivotal in every state that has abolished the death penalty in the last 15 years. And also, in addition to this kind of education that they do, WTI also provides an essential network of peer support for exonerated people, most of whom receive no compensation or access to reentry services when released from death row. So if you are currently in college or know people who are in college or enrolled in school, I think a great idea for a club, a criminal justice club, a pro-life club, might be to invite a death row exoneree to speak on your college campus. And I am now going to invite you to consider, after our time together, after hearing from Christina, after hearing from our inspiring young poets, what may be coming to mind for you when you consider what your next steps could be in this movement to end the death penalty. So I invite you now to consider this question. What is one thing you are willing to commit to today to be a part of the movement to end the death penalty? Maybe some examples that come to mind would be signing up to attend a First Friday prayer vigil, looking up your local state coalition to end the death penalty, or maybe you need to start with, does my state have the death penalty? That's always a good first step to know. So go ahead and think about it for a moment, and then I invite you when you're ready to put your answers in the chat, and I'll read them as they come in. All right, and feel free to start putting in your answers into the chat at any time that you come up with them. Oh, from Kristen. Hi, Kristen. To encourage her federation to connect more on a grassroots level and locally to end the death penalty in states that still have it. Yes, excellent. Zuri would invite more priests to visit and serve people on death row as they're lacking access to the sacraments. So true, so important. Sarah from Ohio, continuing to be active in her university chapter of Ohio's project. Excellent. Kara sharing resources with my parish. Christian, as someone who is not in a death penalty state, talking to friends who are from them to see if they can vote out officials who support it. Yes, I love that. I love that. Vote them out. Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of those ideas. I think they are all great places to start, continue. And then I want to make sure that you all know that Catholic Mobilizing Network is here to serve as a resource for you. If you're not familiar already, we have our social media accounts, our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, and then our website is catholicsmobilizing.org, where we have many more resources around education, advocacy, and prayer opportunities around ending the death penalty and promoting restorative justice. And then if you have general questions you'd like to ask, we can be reached through our info account at info@catholicsmobilizing.org. Or if you have a question for me, or if you want to have a conversation, or if you're interested in inviting a speaker from CMN to talk about the Catholic call to end the death penalty, whether it be at your parish or at your school, please let me know. And you can reach me at emmat@catholicsmobilizing.org, and we can figure it out together. And so I'd like to end now in a closing prayer. So if you will pray with me in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so we go forward now, knowing that the violence stops with us. Bless us, O compassionate one, and give us strength for the journey. Fill us with that amazing grace, which breaks down walls of hatred and fear and allows your love and mercy to enter in, that the process of healing and reconciliation might begin. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I'd like to give, once again, a huge thank you to our featured speakers today. Zuri and Danny, thank you for sharing your incredible words. I'm so grateful for your poems and your presence. And to Christina, thank you for the important, incredible work you do and for spending time with us today. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone here who attended our webinar. I'm so glad to have you. We'll be sending out the recording of the webinar later this week. Okay, and with that, let us go. Thank you so much.